ain't no sleep. Nightmares are going broke again.
What's good, everybody? What's good? It's your boy, Cardinal Bud Crawford, or E.S. Red, if that's what you want to call me. And we are back for another one. Alright, y'all, new topic. Are fighters like Terence Bud Crawford and Errol Spence Jr. faking pay-per-view buys? Alright, this is a pretty interesting topic, you know. A lot of things in boxing revolve around the pay-per-view sales, the pay-per-view numbers. And the reason that is because that's back-end money that fighters, promoters, investors all receive off these fights to recoup. Well, the investors and the promoters are recouping their money. The fighters are just receiving extra payout and extra benefit for the fight being successful. And it can dictate how much more you're going to be featured on pay-per-view. If you had a good showing, they're probably going to feature you on pay-per-view again. If your showing was crappy, nobody tuned in, nobody watched, they're probably not going to show you anymore. And nobody's going to be willing to invest in putting you on pay-per-view. It's also how you gauge new fighters. It's how you gauge older fighters. You know, an older fighter whose career went down a little bit, they'll put them on pay-per-view, see if people still interested. If nobody buys the fight, well, you're relegated to a gatekeeper, or probably doing in-house fights, you know, that are not that popular. You know, people are not supporting that much. So pay-per-view buys, pay-per-view sales, pay-per-view numbers have a lot to do with the sport of boxing. It can make a boxer extremely rich, extremely famous, or it can break a fighter, you know, very easily, very quickly. So are fighters like Crawford and Spence actually faking or flogging their numbers simply to pretend to be more popular than they are? The short answer is yes. A lot of fighters do. Now, faking the numbers, I think that's a strong word to use. Faking, I'm gonna try to avoid using the word faking. It's more of manipulating the numbers, because most of the time what promoters, and it's not really the fighters that's actually doing this. It's normally not really the fighters that's actually doing this. It's the promoters doing this. And what they do, because once again, those pay-per-view numbers, pay-per-view buys can make a fighter more popular. It can give people the perception that the fighter is popular. So you want the highest pay-per-view numbers possible. Now, what a lot of promoters do through other companies and through restaurants and bars and different type of venues is they'll have, especially if they're invested in those venues, or someone investing in the fight owns a franchise of bars or a franchise of restaurants or something, they'll have that investor purchase the fight in bulk. And what I mean by that is every restaurant, every bar that they own, that restaurant will purchase the fight just to run the numbers up. And it's a good thing, it's a bad thing. It's a bad thing because it can give a false sense of high numbers when actual fans and real viewers are not. And you know, it's real viewers watching these fights at bars and restaurants and stuff, but they're not actually the people who are purchasing the fight with real dollars. So it can give a false sense of, okay, well, the fight back end did this, or the fight pay-per-view numbers were this high, when they really might have been hundreds of thousands less than what the actual numbers are showing. So let's say, you know, you got investors, they own a series of restaurants. They purchase enough through those restaurants to run up the numbers into the high hundreds of thousands. Let's say just that one investor owns a franchise of restaurants that can run up 100,000 buys for your pay-per-view. And you know, through real buys and real viewers, you do 200,000. So you got 300,000 buys or 300,000 sales of pay-per-views, where in actuality, you only really had 200,000 buys, or 200,000 people purchased the pay-per-view. So really 100,000 of those buys you didn't even make any real money off of, because they came from an investor anyway. So that person is going to have to be recruit their money for purchasing those fights through those restaurants, because it's not free. So it's basically another tactic of investing into the fight. So you run the numbers up, hoping more people buy the fight, or more people are interested in the fight, or it helps it when it hits circulation on cable TV, for more people to be interested in watching the replay of the fight. Now, is that a bad thing? I mean, it's really not, you know, because the initial day that the fight happens, the numbers need to be as high as possible. Now, as long as there are people actually watching the fight at those restaurants, if those restaurants are completely empty, like during the C19 days, when, you know, nobody could be in restaurants, but there were still restaurants purchasing fights. It might have only been 4 or 5 people in the restaurant. But it runs the numbers up into the high hundreds of thousands once again. So you wouldn't have gotten those extra boosted numbers, even though nobody was in those restaurants watching the fight. You still got that extra boosted numbers. So it can be a good thing in situations like that. But on the bad side, it can make your pay-per-view look more popular than it actually was. And when they start to look at the dollar amounts that it generated, they're lower than what they should be. Now, are fighters like Errol, Spence, and Terence Crawford purposely faking numbers? Once again, like I said, I don't think the fighters are the ones doing it. It is the investors, and it is the promoters putting on the fights. Maybe fighters like Crawford, the independent fighters, you know, they might invest a little bit of their own money into doing that because they don't have a promoter. So it depends on the fighter that you're talking about and the circumstances surrounding that fighter. Did fighters like Mayweather, Pacquiao, Oscar De La Hoya, did they have to fudge numbers? Well, they were still doing that back in the day. They were still having restaurants and stuff, and investors purchasing fights to make it more popular. But the difference is people were actually selling pay-per-views back then. So you really didn't need to do it, but it just ran the numbers up higher, so it really didn't matter. So if you were actually getting 600, 700, 800,000 real viewers, and then you got that other 200,000 to 300,000 investor purchase buys, it would push your numbers well over the 1 million viewer mark. And you know, there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with trying to have more people involved within the fight and pushing the numbers up, as long as you have real viewers purchasing the fight. If you don't have a real audience purchasing the fight, it doesn't matter how many investors purchase the fight for you. It's still going to look bad once the real numbers come out and people start digging through the real numbers. Let me know what y'all think about that down below. Hit that like button for me. Share, subscribe. Holler at me on all social media platforms, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, but you're more than likely to get a response on YouTube. So holler at me over there if you want a response. It's hot, and I think I'm ready to get out of here. I'm done rambling. It's your boy Cardinal Bud Crawford, or E.S. Red, if that's what you want to call me, and we know.
Lord, send me somebody that I can trust.